Americans are very mad about the state of our healthcare system, and CEOs are apparently just realizing this. Jokes, memes, and SNL segments are being condemned as insensitive to the family of Brian Thompson, the 50-year-old United Healthcare CEO who was gunned down in broad daylight in Manhattan last week. Thompson was in New York for United Healthcare's annual shareholder meeting, but at least, as one online commentator put it, he died doing what he loved, increasing shareholder value. Today, we're going to answer the age-old question, is it okay to laugh at the death of a CEO? We'll also get into the ongoing manhunt for the shooter who some people are calling the copay killer, and we'll uncover the boiling fury rising to the surface for working-class Americans. Is this class consciousness? Let's get into it. For better or for worse, I've been glued to the news lately, but it can be hard to spot the bias in the news that I'm reading, and I'm definitely guilty of falling into my own echo chamber. And depending on the bias of your news sources, you could be getting very different slants on major news stories. For example, on Ground News, I found this story. Executives seek more protection after United Healthcare CEO Thompson killing. In the 165 articles Ground News gathered covering this topic, a left-leaning New York Magazine uses the headline, "The United Healthcare shooting was inevitable," while right-leaning Entrepreneur Magazine uses the headline, "Should business leaders fear for their lives? What you're not hearing about the United Healthcare tragedy." Very different takes, and if you're only reading content that skews left or right, you may not know how the other side is interpreting the situation. This is where Ground News comes in, and why I've been using them for over a year. Today's partner, Ground News, is a great tool for understanding the news. They offer helpful content you need when faced with starkly different headlines about the same story. Here you can see the overall bias distribution of the news sources covering this story, with only 13% of sources from the right, indicating that this may not be on everyone's radar. If you scroll down, you can see the overall factuality rating of the sources, with fully 86% scoring high factuality ratings, indicating there's a large range of quality sources to choose from on this subject. You can also see more information about who owns which source. Only 5% of the sources reporting this are independent news sources, and 57% are media conglomerates, which makes sense given how much of our media is run by giant conglomerates. All of these tools can be really helpful to provide more context to the media you consume, which is important for media literacy and for recognizing bias, and I'm able to get all this context and information thanks to Ground News. I also love their blind spot feature, which highlights different articles that are being covered more by one side of the political spectrum than the other. So if your news slants leftist, you'll see the stories you're missing on the right. It's a great way to understand where your Uncle Rick, who only watches Fox News, is getting his stories, so you're ready to face him this holiday season. I'm always really impressed with Ground News, and I genuinely think they're a great resource for identifying biases in the media. So scan my QR code, click the link in the description, or go to ground.news/Leeja to get 50% off the same Vantage plan I use to stay informed, which comes to about $5 a month. Get unlimited access to all Ground News has to offer while helping an independent team keep the media transparent. Thanks, Ground News. At around 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning last week, United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson was heading to a shareholder meeting when a man approached him from behind and shot him multiple times in the back. The gunman fled the scene on a rented city bike and hasn't been seen since. Thompson died, leaving a surviving widow and 2 sons. His death also left the country in shock, because we really hate it when gun violence affects our most prized citizens, CEOs. The hunt for the killer is ongoing. A person of interest has been identified, a 26-year-old named Luigi Mangione, who was brought in for questioning after a McDonald's employee in Pennsylvania thought they recognized him from the posters and called the cops. And listen, don't give the McDonald's employee too much for being a rat. New York City was offering $10,000 reward, and the FBI added $50,000 on top of that, knowing that the people are broke and will even turn in Robin Hood for $60,000. We know that at the scene of the crime, there were bullet casings found with the words deny, defend, and depose etched into them, likely referencing the common phrase health insurance critics use describing the 3 Ds of health insurance as deny, delay, and defend. Once a claim is submitted, health insurers will delay in responding, then deny the claim, and then defend their denial if a claimant brings them to court, which they usually won't. Every dollar not paid out for a claim is a dollar that goes into the insurer's bottom line. It is a rare industry wherein not providing the service they're meant to perform is always the preferred outcome. You pay in so you have coverage in the case of an emergency, and you pay every month whether or not you need the coverage. Therefore, whatever they can do to not pay for people who do need the coverage is the preferred business decision. And whatever profit is left over goes to the pocket of the CEO and ultimately to the shareholders. At the time of his death, Brian Thompson's yearly pay package was around $10 million per year. United Healthcare is the largest private insurance provider in the U.S. by market share. According to Forbes, United Health Group, parent company to United Healthcare, had profits of $22 billion in 2023. United Health Group's profits Profits, not revenue, profits, the total left over to play with at the end of the year, have quadrupled since 2010. Not all of this profit comes from health insurance, however, as United Health Group has expanded its operations by buying up competitors and integrating its services, meaning it buys up related companies so it can control more aspects of the healthcare market, including owning doctors' groups, pharmacy benefits, and more. It is, in fact, currently facing an FTC lawsuit accusing it of violating antitrust laws in its latest attempted acquisition. Brian Thompson, United Healthcare's CEO, was under investigation for insider trading, having dumped $15 million worth of stock before the federal antitrust investigation was publicly revealed. While under Thompson's leadership, it's alleged in a lawsuit filed in November 2023 that United Healthcare started using an AI program to systematically deny coverage to elderly patients on a Medicare Advantage plan, despite the fact that the AI algorithm has a 90% error rate, and the company allegedly knew about it. They knew about it but did nothing, knowing that only 0.2% of policyholders will appeal their denied claims, so allowing the AI algorithm to run rampant would go largely unchallenged. This algorithm likely played a hand in earning United Healthcare the title of most denials in the industry. In 2023, the company denied about 1 in every 3 claims it received, twice the industry average of 16%. As news of the CEO's slaying spread, users took to social media to share gut-wrenching stories about how these coverage denials affected them and their loved ones. With this background, it's no wonder why news of Thompson's death was met with resounding cheers from much of the American public from across the political spectrum. The Facebook post by United Healthcare announcing his death received 23,000 laughing emojis before being taken down. Commenters quipped, "I'm sorry, prior authorization is required for thoughts and prayers," and "my empathy is out of network for this one." When images of the alleged shooter were released, the fervor only grew from there because it turns out, despite the graininess of the images and the fact that half his face is covered in some of them, the shooter might be dreamy? Thirsty posts quickly followed suit. Honestly, the content reacting to this shooting has been truly top-notch. I have been sharing memes like crazy over on Instagram, I must admit. However, the jubilant public reaction has led to pearl clutching by some. The common denominator amongst those who are clutching their pearls seems to be that they are members of the ruling class, they are adjacent to or related to members of the ruling class, or they are members of the working class who have it twisted that they are somehow in close proximity to the ruling class, despite the fact that we all have much more in common with people who are unhoused than we ever will with people who make $10 million per year like Brian Thompson did. The median household income in the US in 2023 was about $80,000 per year. You have to earn at least $780,000 per year to be in the top 1% of earners nationally in the United States. That's almost 10 times more than the median household income in the US. And you have to make at least $2.8 million per year to be in the top 0.1% of earners. Despite what the American dream would have you believe, the socioeconomic status of your parents is one of the greatest determinants of the socioeconomic status you will achieve in your lifetime, and the amount of work you put into it only plays a small role in your overall earnings throughout your life. The income stratification in this country has become more and more unequal, sped up by the deregulatory efforts and tax reform of the Reagan years, which allowed for businesses to grow unchecked and their profits to go largely untaxed, so that as workers became more and more productive, their earnings stayed the same and the riches generated by their increased productivity went straight to the C-suite and the shareholders. So where CEOs earned on average 20 times more than the average worker in 1965, today they earn 290 times more than the average worker. And worker earnings have stagnated while the cost of everything, especially housing, has skyrocketed. Real estate is widely considered one of the principal ways a person can create wealth that can pass to future generations. Given this backdrop, when the pandemic hit and we all had a little time on our hands to notice these inequalities, along with our own mortality, a lot of people, myself included, became more aware and enraged by the inequalities. We stayed home, we wore masks, lost jobs, or were forced to work underpaid jobs and risk our lives, watched loved ones die. And meanwhile, our elected leaders and members of the wealthiest classes were having parties. Celebrities were posting sad, lamenting videos from their mansions. Profits for some of the largest businesses skyrocketed, profiting off our deaths and misery. Not only was it the first time many of us had the space and time to stop and realize the inequality, it also generated even more inequality right before our eyes, while we felt largely powerless to do anything about it. So it's no wonder that less than 5 years after the start of a years-long pandemic that we're all still grappling with because it was a collective global trauma we've never unpacked, where healthcare, or the lack thereof, was front and center, where our own mortalities were on display and our well-being sacrificed for company profits, that violence towards the CEO of the largest health insurance company in the country would manifest, and that the national reaction would not be particularly solemn. There's a great quote by Clarence Darrow, an early 20th century labor union attorney, who said, "I have never killed anyone, but I have read some obituary notices with great satisfaction." Most of us are not murderers, and the heroism of the gunman is being hotly debated online, but it is a perfectly rational and understandable reaction to, at the very least, feel no remorse for a man who represents the part of the healthcare system that feels most unjust in the United States and who is a member of the 0.1%, an income strata none of us have any chance of ever getting into, and which actively hurts those of us who aren't part of it. The pearl clutchers and elites are saying, but what about his children? He had a wife. He didn't personally do anything wrong. The system is so much bigger than him. He didn't create it. Why should he have to die for it? And I don't deny the pain and suffering I'm sure his family is going through due to his death, nor do I feel personal joy about death generally, but the cop-out that he was simply existing in a broken system is bullshit. For many of us, that is the case. We got to pay the bills, we got to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Speaking out against the larger system must also come with existing within the system as a necessary evil. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism, etc., etc. You get it. For the CEO of the largest private health insurance company in the United States, who is a member of the 0.1%, sorry, that doesn't fly. His powerlessness is not the same. Yes, one man can't change the whole system overnight, but he wasn't even trying to. By all accounts, he was actively complicit in it, allowing an AI algorithm with a 90% failure rate to continue, dumping millions of dollars in stock before negative news got out about his company. Hell, the mere fact of making it to CEO after working your way up for 20 years like he did indicates you're willing to drink the Kool-Aid and increase shareholder value above all else, because that is your job as CEO. A person with a conscience wouldn't take that job, especially at a health insurance company. But I don't doubt that Thompson genuinely believed that United Healthcare as an insurance company provided a helpful and necessary service to millions of Americans in need of healthcare coverage. I'm sure he slept fine at night, having convinced himself that the benefits outweighed the harms, that the growth of the business at all costs was a net positive for humanity. I've been in corporate America. I've been in meetings and had out-of-body experiences watching people give slide deck presentations and genuinely telling me they think we're part of a big family, talking in corporate jargon while I observe in wonder. You really care about this, huh? You really believe in the stuff you're saying. You genuinely care about the functioning of this giant company that doesn't give a shit whether you live or die. I feel similarly whenever I accidentally open LinkedIn. That place is nuts. But again, for those of us out here doing the song and dance to do the job, to get the money, to pay the bills, fine. We all have to participate in the system to some extent. Though if you're working at a health insurance company, I still have to question what you're doing. But to become CEO of a health insurance company, that requires more than just a song and dance. That requires drinking deeply of the corporate Kool-Aid. And while capitalism comes with a certain amount of brainwashing for all of us, I really lose any sense of empathy at that point. So questioning whether or not we are allowed to laugh at the death of Brian Thompson or whether Brian Thompson deserved to die has to also come with the conversation about whether the tens of thousands of people who were denied health insurance coverage for necessary medical care, some of whom died as a result, deserved to die so that he could maximize his executive pay package this year. Because the thing with violence is that it comes in many forms, and our little pea brains tend to place most weight and fear and horror on the person-on-person physical violence we saw in Manhattan last week. That is the tippy top, the worst of the worst, because it is so visceral. We can see it. We can put ourselves in those shoes. But profiting off the deaths of people who could have lived but for the denial of coverage by the company they were paying to help them when they needed it, that's an act of violence too, and it's at a much larger scale than a couple bullets in a single person's back. You just have to pull up the floods of individual stories of what happens when coverage is denied to see that the enterprise Brian Thompson was head of, that he personally made millions on, not even in his base pay, that wasn't even enough for him. He also had to dump millions in stocks on insider trading knowledge as well, allegedly, is committing violence against thousands of people every single day. And not to get too philosophical, but Foucault wrote a lot about violence, specifically state-sponsored violence. And as a poli-sci major in undergrad, I had to read him a lot. But the most memorable thing I read was from his book, Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. He discussed the evolution of state-sanctioned violence, how at one point, the people reveled in public executions, beheadings, hangings, the more gruesome, the better. But eventually, that type of violence was seen as improper, barbaric. But that doesn't mean the state quit killing people. It simply developed new ways to kill people that seemed less barbaric. An electric chair, lethal injection. The criminal just falls asleep. And they moved it from public to inside a private room in a prison away from the town square. And so now we can all sleep soundly at night feeling as though we are more civilized than our ancestors who chopped people's heads off and made it into a show. But the reality is that the state is still murdering people, and that is still violence. And that is still, for many people, incredibly barbaric. And I can't help but think of this when I think of the violence Brian Thompson and United Healthcare committed on a daily basis. Shooting him point blank in the street is criminal because it's public, it's visceral, it's a show we're all watching. But killing people quietly through letters of denial, a million little lawsuits, in the name of literally nothing more than enriching yourself and your bosses, well, that's just business, baby. It's legitimate. It's the height of success. $22 billion in profit, that is the definition of success in capitalism. And I see no barbarity here. Still, many people cry, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. To which I say, first of all, that saying is attributed to Gandhi, and it's questionable whether he ever said it, but it was in turn inspired by Exodus 21:23-25, which says, the punishment must match the injury. A life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. An eye for an eye was literally the basis of many laws and legal punishments for centuries. But besides that, there is evidence to suggest that in any major redistribution of wealth and reduction of inequality that has ever happened throughout history, violence was pretty much always a necessary instigator. In his 2017 book, The Great Leveler, Violence and the History of Inequality from the Stone Age to the 21st Century, Stanford professor of history Walter Scheidel, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say that, found that it is almost universally true that violence has been necessary to ensure the redistribution of wealth at any point in time. In his survey of long stretches of human history, Scheidel found that the big equalizing moments in history may not have always had the same cause, but they shared one common root: massive and violent disruptions of the established order. In his 2013 book, Capital in the 21st Century, economist Thomas Piketty, again, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say that, found that economic development does not lead to a drop in inequality and will, in fact, usually exacerbate it. In his survey of the last 200 years, Piketty found it is only violent intervention that can reduce economic inequality. In his book, Professor Scheidel identifies the four horsemen that indicate the coming of greater equality: mass mobilization or state warfare, transformative revolution, state collapse, and plague. Mass mobilization occurred during World War II, after which inequality was hugely reduced. The U.S. saw massive tax increases and state intervention in the economy, which triggered a redistribution of resources down from the 1% to the workers. During the bubonic plague in 14th century Eurasia, a third of the population died, so labor became scarce and wages grew, narrowing the gap between the rich and poor. State collapse was seen in the fall of the Mayan civilization, for example. When states fall apart, everyone is worse off, but technically, it lessens inequality because it wipes out everyone's wealth. No one can be in the 1% if money doesn't exist because your civilization collapsed. In assessing the current situation, Scheidel said, history does not determine the future. Things can change, but change is slow, meaning that perhaps full civilization collapse isn't necessary to fix the current inequalities. That being said, he warns, business as usual may not be enough. I am not advocating war, but repeating the same old ideas ignores the lessons of history. Something truly innovative and original may have to happen in order to create lasting change. Is a hunky gunman, a murder, and a backpack full of Monopoly money the innovative thing that will create lasting change? I don't know, probably not. But the larger discussion this murder is generating, and the fact that it's happening on the internet, a truly innovative and original thing that no society in history has ever had access to, could move us in that direction. Because while we're more divided on social issues than ever in this country, we collectively all agree across the political spectrum that the wealth inequality in this country is unconscionable. That no one needs to make billions of dollars while people are starving and living on the street. A 2024 examination of poll results conducted nationwide found that 63% of Americans, nearly 2/3, approved of a wealth tax. Specifically, Senator Elizabeth Warren has proposed legislation that would apply a 2% tax on an individual's wealth above $50 million each year and a 3% tax on wealth above $1 billion. That means the tax would not apply to any income earned under $50 million. So if you earned $51 million, the 2% tax would only apply to the $1 million above $50 million. But as we've already established, none of us are going to ever earn $50 million. So we would not be charged a single tax dollar under this law, and yet the tax would bring in over $3 trillion in revenue over 10 years. And 63% of us agree that that's a good idea, including 51% of Republicans, over half. What that tells me is that we have an opportunity for a little class solidarity here in these United States of America, and this murder is a great impetus for having a conversation about that. This is bigger than just our healthcare system needing an overhaul. Not only does wealth inequality mean we don't have access to the things we need like food, shelter, and healthcare, it also means that this concentrated money is then being funneled to our politicians, so our government is only responsive to those in the top 0.1% or higher. United Health Group alone has spent $100 million on lobbying since since 1998, according to Open Secrets. America's health insurance plans, a special interest group representing the interests of a National Association of Health Insurance Providers, spent over $13 million last year alone lobbying the federal government and had over 50 lobbyists crawling around Capitol Hill, talking in our politicians' ears and killing bills that would hurt the health insurance industry. Wealth inequality is worse than it's ever been in living memory, and most Americans can agree they are pissed about it. Violence like we saw last week against the CEO of a giant healthcare company creates opportunity to have a conversation about what we can agree upon and how we can fix it. There are so many issues dividing us right now. We just had an election that proved as much, so finding things we can agree on is the only way to make progress when we are this deeply divided. A majority of us agree wealth inequality in the United States has become unbearable, and money in our politics is creating corruption and making politicians less answerable to the people. Billionaires aren't going to willingly hand over their money in any real way. The charities they create to try to solve the problems their hoarding of wealth created don't count. Protecting the common good is not something the free market will ever do because it does not generate the most amount of profit possible. It is the government's job to step in and ensure its people have the resources they need. And most of us agree that a billionaire tax is a good first step. But if we're ever going to get our government to be responsive to the people such that it listens to us and imposes that billionaire tax, the real fix comes from getting money out of our politics. If we don't, our government will continue to only serve the wealthiest minority among us. Wealth inequality will grow, and nothing will be done to reform that or our healthcare industry because they have the money and the lobbyists to push their own interests above ours. So what should you do? Well, share some funny memes if the spirit moves you, but hold on to the rage and direct it towards something productive. We need a billionaire tax, and we need to get money out of politics. The 2% tax bill was last introduced in March 2024, and it's called the Ultra Millionaire Tax Act. It was introduced in both the House and the Senate by Representative 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗏 in the House and Senator Elizabeth Warren in the Senate. They were referred to committee where they have been languishing. It would likely need to be reintroduced in the next session, so call your senators and representatives, conservative and liberal alike, to tell them that you support the bill, and go to movetoamend.org to learn more about the work they're doing to get money out of politics for good. And if you're interested in learning more about eating the rich and building solidarity, I invite you to join me over on Patreon, where we're planning some initiatives to help build community in Trump's America. Plus, you get ad-free and uncensored versions of these videos as well. Go to patreon.com/LeejaMiller to join. Thank you to my multi-platinum patrons, David, RHT, LaTranger Lucas, Joshua Cole, Thomas Johnson, Anthony Giles, Tay, and Brett Piantek. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you like this video, you'll also like my video that I made about how Trump's tariffs will backfire. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.